In this video, I'd like to run through the Adobe Camera Raw interface. Now, we're going to start off in Bridge, and we can get to Adobe Camera Raw through various means. We can double click an image, and that will take us to Camera Raw. However, it has to go through Photoshop in the first instance. And Photoshop's opening in the background. Photoshop has opened, and it is now triggering Adobe Camera Raw. Now that was quite a little wait for Camera Raw to open. So let's just cancel that, close Photoshop. So from that we can see that in order to activate Camera Raw, Photoshop had to be opened at the same time. So Photoshop opens and that activated Camera Raw. We can do the same thing by pressing Control and 0, and that would open up Adobe Camera Raw through Photoshop. We can go to File, Open, and there's Control and 0. However, Adobe Camera Raw can also be hosted by Bridge, so we don't have to open Photoshop in the first place. And that can be done through Open in Camera Raw, or the shortcut is Control and R. So that's what we'll do in this instant. I'm going to select the first image, and I'll select that image, and with the Shift key selected at the same time, all 5 are selected. I'm now going to press Control and R, and that will open those images straight into Adobe Camera Raw. Now we can work on each of these images independently, but before we do anything, we need to set up Camera Raw in a way that we wish it to operate. Now we've already been and seen the preferences. I'll just drag that into the window. So we've already set up Camera Raw, but it's useful to know that we can actually access it from within the Camera Raw interface. Okay, so we did all that in a previous video. But we have another thing down here called the workflow options. Now if you look at the histogram here, you can see the distribution of tones within that image. And if I click another image, you can see the distribution of tones within that image. Now if I go to the workflow options, now this is a raw file, and we should know by now that a raw file doesn't have a color space embedded within it. There may be some information to say how it should be interpreted and things like that, but until it's a pixelated image and sent to Photoshop, the color space is totally unassigned, and the bit depth is, well, it's its native 14-bit, or the nearest equivalent is 16-bit. So the idea is this workflow option is designed to tell Adobe Camera Raw what to assign to that image when it's sent to Photoshop. Now it's important to set this up before we actually start processing, moving these sliders, because what we set in here will have an effect on the way that histogram is represented. So at the moment the color space is sRGB, and notice we've got a large peak on the right there. I'm now going to change that to Pro Photo, and notice all these others, these are all profiles, but these are printer profiles, all the same sort of thing. It tells the computer how to interpret the color information. I'm going to change that to Pro Photo RGB and watch what happens to the histogram. The distribution of tones changes, and so when you're adjusting these sliders, you need to have the correct color space set, because otherwise you'll be maybe incorrectly adjusting some of these sliders to remove clipping and things like that. Now normally when I'm producing a high quality print, I will have this color space set to Pro Photo RGB and 16 bits per channel, so that when it goes to Photoshop, those are the attributes attached, assigned to that image. Okay, so I'll click OK. We have down the left hand side all the images that we imported into Adobe Camera Raw now. And we can just select whichever image we wish to work on and adjust the settings however we want them. We also have a little menu here, so we can, if we maybe work on one image, we can then apply the same treatment to another image by synchronizing them. We also have a really useful thing called merge to HDR, merge to panorama. We can change the magnification of the screen here. I'm just selecting, left clicking, and you can see the magnification going up here. We can also change the magnification in here. We can press Control and 0 to fill the screen, Control Alt 0 to go to 100% magnification, Control 0 back. So we can move around within here. So if I go to Control Alt 0, 100%, spacebar, press and drag with the left button, we can move around our image like that. Control 0, and we're back to there. Along the top we have the tools, zoom tool, the hand tool for moving if we wish, white balance tool, color sampler, targeted adjustment, that's useful for certain things like in the tone curve. We have the crop tool, straighten tool, spot removal, red eye removal, and these three here, these are local adjustment tools. So that's the adjustment brush, the graduated filter, and the radial filter. We've just covered the preferences. We can rotate the images left or right, and we can assign a mark for deletion if we wish. This just goes to full screen mode, so it fills your screen if it's a smaller window. So it's always best to fill your screen with the interface. Here we can see we have the histogram. So we use this a lot to determine the positions of these sliders so that we get a nice full tonal range image. Under here we've got RGB, red, green and blue, the three color channels. And if I move the cursor over the image, you can see those numbers change. Now at the moment this is a kind of grey image, and most of those numbers are very, very similar, representing grey. If I go to a color image, over the blue area, you can see the blue numbers are higher than the equivalent red and greens. If we go to a green area, you can see the greens more dominant than the reds and the blues. Okay, so that gives us good feedback as to the color values underneath, and that's useful for when we're selecting the white balance tool. Okay, so if I was to go to an area that I think should be a neutral grey, you can see at the moment the colors here aren't quite neutral there. There's a predominance of blue. If I select that, all of those colors will go to the same neutral setting. Okay, so again, that's a useful feedback. This shows you some basic information about how it was taken, the camera settings. And then we have the different panels. Now basic, these are your primary controls for controlling color temperature, the white balance, the exposure and tone adjustments, and these are what's called the presence sliders, which emphasize color and vibrance and things like that. If we now go to the next panel, we've got the tone curve, and we can have it in what's called parametric or point, depending on the way you wish to work. If we go to the next one, it's detail, and this deals with sharpening, and we're talking really about pre-sharpening, just a modest amount of sharpening to the initial image before sending to Photoshop. At one time these weren't very sophisticated tools, so the mantra was do not sharpen until the very end, but Because this is such a powerful tool now, a modest amount of pre-sharpening can be applied before we send to Photoshop. Noise reduction, very, very useful for certainly for images that are taken with a fairly high ISO setting. HSL, hue, saturation, luminance. So we've got the controls here, and the same controls affecting different aspects of the color and brightness information. So in this particular image here, say the blue area, if I drag the blue slider to the left, you can see it darkens the blues because we're adjusting the luminance. Press the saturation, do the same, drag the blues to the left, and it reduces the blues or increases the blues. So we can adjust very specific colors within an image, globally of course. And if we want to create a black and white image, a grayscale, we can convert to grayscale. We've still got the same sliders. Default brings them all back to normal, or auto gives it an automatic adjustment initially, but again we can just adjust these sliders to produce the sort of effect we wish our monochrome image to have. Untick. Of course it's a raw file, so all these are just filter adjustments over the top. We don't adjust the actual image itself. Then we've got split toning, lens corrections, effects, dehaze, grain and post-crop vignetting, camera calibration, presets. These are a set of adjustments that have been made that can be applied across a whole series of images as a single hit. So I'll be covering all of these in separate videos. And snapshots. These are adjustments, separate adjustments that have been made to this one image. So snapshots are applicable to a single image. Presets can be applied to any image and hundreds of images at the same time if you wish. So you go back to snapshots, and you can see no adjustments. That's the beginning image. That's without a straightening of the image at all. Basic panel and color corrections. So this was just a series of snapshots I took of the image as I processed it. Okay, and those are just saved by clicking a new preset as I went through it, and so you can see the sort of work that I applied to that image. So those are the main panels that we work with. We've also got down here open image, which sends it to Photoshop, cancel, which cancels what you're doing, and done. Once you've applied your work, if you don't want to send it to Photoshop, just press done. It will save the settings and you'll return back to Adobe Camera, back to Bridge. You can change these little buttons. So if I press the Shift key, that changes to Open Object. So it will open that image into Photoshop as a smart object. If I press the Alt key, we can reset the image, or we can open a copy. We've also got different ways of viewing how we've gone and processed our image, and we can cycle between different views like that, so before and after. Okay, so that's a useful way of just seeing the effects of the changes we've made. And also down at the bottom left we have the save image. I never really use this, but you have an option here to save from Camera Raw into various formats, TIFF, JPEG, Photoshop, where to send it to, and compressions and things like that. So there is an option within Camera Raw to save the processed images that you're creating. I'll cancel that. So that's just a quick overview of the interface of Adobe Camera Raw.